Okay. Over the next at least two videos, we're going to be looking at receptors from the digital end of things. Specifically, we're talking about computed radiography and then direct digital radiography. And we're going to break those down and all. Following that, we're going to be looking at, questions related to processing and display and the like. And, kind of work our way through all of these different things here. Things that you can do, things that are done automatically, things that you can do and all. And maybe even a little bit of some of what's going on here in the future. This particular topic is covered in Chapter 6 of your Farber book. Please remember it's also located within the FOSS binder, but I'm kind of just sticking with one. Pages 143 through 150. I may go through a little bit more detail than they do, because that is, after all, not very many pages. But for the most part, I'm sticking with it pretty well. It's the first thing I actually pulled up here and to be honest with you, this is sort of straddling everything. Maybe I should have perhaps put this under the film and intensifying screens at all. But I found it, and I was looking at it, and I decided to do something about it, which is that when these terms come up in the latter part of this chapter on the intensifying screens, and what they're talking about is this term spectral emission versus matching versus sensitivity. The color of the light that's produced excuse me, by the intensity screen is the energy that's produced by the intensity screens, and that's where you have your emission coming in. So, we were talking a little bit about, for example, the position of light, position. We were talking a little bit, for example, about the fact that calcium tungstate are blue emitters, and you've got lanthanum or gadolinium oxysulfides. Those are either, blue-green emitters or green emitters and things like that. Spectral matching essentially meant, as I believe I defined this one here, is that you had to use the appropriate film with the appropriate intensifying screens. So, for example, if you had intensifying screens that were giving off a kind of a blue emission, and you had green sensitive film, you could reasonably anticipate that there was not going to be an awful lot of reaction there as a result, and the image that you were going to get obviously is going to be, poor imaging, there's going to be poor exposure and the like. The last one here is that the spectral sensitivity, and this kind of relates a little bit to the darkroom, which is kind of what I was just actually talking about here, which is that if you look, I guess almost like on the color wheel, where blue is, for example, the opposite side is usually orange, I think, and the like. And here's the thing, if your film is blue sensitive, then the red that's sort of on the opposite side there is what you would have the least sensitive light. And on the other hand, if the film is blue sensitive, then your intensifying screens need to be giving off blue light, because that's your spectral sensitivity. So with the darkroom, remember we were talking about it was the opposite. Okay, this is that chart that I have put up on the board a couple of times now, relating both to the analog versus the digital systems, and kind of a breakdown in the way I've sort of perceived things, which is that the image acquisition, image processing, image display, and image storage, in essence, and you could use different words for those four, but really in essence those are the four kind of, I guess you'd say, big categories where we can kind of box these different image receptors in. And so when we were talking about the film screen system, the acquisition of the image came because radiation struck the screens, producing light, based on the transmitted radiation, that in turn exposed the film. That film required chemical processing to produce a fixed and visible image. You took that image, that point, and you displayed it on a view box, and it was a fixed image. And long-term storage really was in a film jacket. It was put in a file room, and generally speaking, after 5 to 7 years, they were destroyed. Now, where computed and digital radiography are concerned, they're eventually kind of reached the same place, but you notice that in the image acquisition side, things are a little bit different. because with computed radiography, you're required to use a cassette device that contains a PSP plate, a photosimulable phosphor plate, okay, that in turn takes the image and acquires it. Okay, that has to be processed because you're going to insert it into a CR reader, and there is going to be a readout based on a special, was it a red neon laser? And a certain amount of pre-processing is actually occurring that will enable it to come up on a display, which is your monitor. Your monitor has the ability to manipulate the image, say for example through windowing or leveling. Finally, it's going to be stored out either as a printout, okay, or it can be stored as a tape, or it can be stored on packs, which indeed is most of what you all see. Digital radiography, the first two are different. You have what are called detectors, and we're going to kind of break some of these things apart, that are going to take the transmitted radiation and is going to take it and convert it into an electrical signal. You do have a certain amount of algorithms processed, but notice what happens here. With digital radiography, acquisition and processing really is all occurring at the same time, immediately, and that's one of the reasons why the images come out so quickly. Okay, once you have it on display, you now can, like with CR, manipulate it and all, or you can print it out, and finally it's ends up being stored on the server. But there is clear differences with the acquisition and processing between what's going on with computed radiography versus what's going on with direct digital radiography. Now, with computed radiography, you've got that extra step, and in part that happens because we started out with a device, was a cassette that looked, as I've told you, remarkably like the cassettes that you use with film screen systems. In fact, you could go look them up, and the colors are the same, the sizes are the same, and all. They're shaped the same, you know. And a lot of this had to do, I suspect, to get compliance from the technologist and all. The one thing, though, with CR cassettes, for the most part, is you have a much more limited number of sizes. Cassettes contain an imaging plate, but there's also other things outside. One thing is that you'd have a barcode label there, or a sticker of some kind, that identifies this cassette. So this essentially is the device that you are using to link this cassette with a particular procedure and, of course, with a particular patient. And so with each new patient that comes in and all like that, you know, you're going to work and you're checking your patient identifier to make sure that you've got the correct patient and all. You pull up the appropriate procedure for the work list management. Okay, you have your barcode, and what you're essentially going to do, if our patient is supposed to have a chest x-ray, is that you barcode a particular cassette, and what you are doing is saying this cassette is going to be part of this particular procedure on this particular patient. Okay, now these cassettes also have other labels because it's kind of understood that you don't automatically know which way it's going to scan in the reader, so you may perhaps want to try to arrange it such that you don't have to do reversals or tip it upside down and things like that, so that essentially it's going to identify what is the top and what is the left side of each of these individual cassettes. Okay, there usually is also some kind of a sticker on there that you can write on easily, so that you could identify the particular patient, for example. Because remember now, in this case, you're not using any kind of a card or anything like that to identify the patient. Okay, so you get the cassette in here, and what you're going to do is use a barcode. Now, the barcode may be handheld like this, or it may be fixed. You scan it in. It has that unique number. You can see we got those here. By the way, notice that we've got different types of cassettes here again. Kind of back off. You know, the orange ones were the AFCA cassettes. You can see we've got Kodak, now Carescreen. You actually recognize these as being Fuji cassettes and all. Okay. Yeah, this is another thing here, so you can kind of tell if you want to identify the body part. You can write on those things. So you have assigned a patient to that particular cassette. You are going to take the you're also at the same time essentially going to pick up the body part. Okay, and the body part is going to give you the appropriate computer algorithms that are necessary for that part. And we're going to go into that in a great deal more detail under the pre-processing and things like that, so hang on, we'll be there. Okay, so just kind of background, not necessarily related to computed radiography. That patient data that I was talking about, where did it actually come from? Well, your patient's actually going to come into the hospital or the clinic, and of course, it's going to sit down with the admissions folks or the registration folks here, and they're going to give their pertinent demographics. Okay, that's going to be the name, age, insurance, what the procedure is. Do they have an order and things like that? All that stuff is actually going to be entered into the hospital information system, which is this huge database essentially of all of the patients. If this is a new patient, they're going to be assigned a medical record number, and also they have that unique number. The hospital information systems are linked to the radiology information system. So if the patient is going to have an X-ray procedure, the data actually is exported over to the RIS or the radiology information system. There, okay, the information goes over. The patient is to have a chest X-ray. Okay, here you as the technologist are going to be putting in or inputting information that relates, for example, when the patient was basically came over, when the patient was started, when the patient was finished. If charges are necessary, you're going to be doing those and all. How many films, if there are repeats, all of that demographic data there is actually going on in through the radiology information system. Long term, it is the physician who's going to dictate the results, and that too is actually done in the radiology information system. Okay, so your computed radiography equipment is going to consist of a reader, and that reader has software that is specific for the radiology. It may be what's creating the image, it may be how you manipulate the image, you can flip the image, things like that. All of that is part of this software that I'm actually referring to. Your usable part, of course, is going to be the cassette that has the imaging plate within it. Now, as I said, the cassettes are very, very similar in concept for what you had for a film screen system here. You wanted one side of it, of course, to be radiolucent, because you certainly didn't want any radiation attenuated by the cassette if you could help it. You wanted all the radiation, the transmitted radiation, of course, to strike the imaging plate. This imaging plate is located, it is usually a single plate, is located within the cassette. There were no intensifying screens or anything like that there. And finally, of course, the image has to be displayed, and that was going to be on a monitor. Now, the little video here is for a particular vendor. It's called ICR code. Let's see how this thing kind of works out. It's going to actually work for me here. This is a demonstration of how this particular system works. Now, this is not one that you're familiar with. If this is a little bit more of a handheld or a fixed type of setup, if it's going to work. Bingo.
Introduction to the ICR 3600. ICR 3600 is a computed radiography machine, ideal for general radiology. The system incorporates a true flat scan path technology. This technology ensures the phosphor plate never leaves the cassette to avoid any plate handling, damage, or wear during the scan process. ICR 3600 can read all size cassettes. One advantage of switching to digital with ICR 3600 is uninterrupted workflow. You still take the X-ray of patients the same way using your existing equipment. Only with CR, you can acquire a digital image within seconds, increasing throughput and optimizing patient care. Once you take the X-ray, you are ready to scan the cassette in the ICR 3600. You simply place the cassette in the reader, close the door, and after verifying the demographic information, you are ready to scan. ICRCo's smart acquisition software, Captera, applies the correct algorithms to the selected anatomy, so you get consistent and excellent image quality every time. Once you scan and see the preview of the image, you are ready to do another scan. The whole process is over within seconds by accepting the image, and you are ready for your next patient.